Hey, welcome everybody to another Direct Connect with Archer. This time joined by Stacy Bresler. Hey, Stacy, how's it going?
Oh, going awesome. Glad to be on here.
It's a great pre-Memorial Day Friday, so any big plans for the weekend?
Yeah, I'm going to spend some time at the barbecue. I think that's apropos for the weekend, and cook up some brats and have some family members over and get ourselves, a little stuffed and
Perfect.
maybe take some power naps.
Sounds like a great weekend. We're keeping it close to home. Just got a new puppy, so
Oh, awesome.
gotta get him trained up. So
Well, don't we? We have to train everything and everybody, right? That's our goal.
it is, and that actually kicks right into our topic today. We're going to talk about compliance program maturity models. Earlier this month, I was at an NATF WCAF peer share, and there was a lot of discussion around benchmarking and maturity models and what they need to be gold plating and what they probably don't need to. And I'll just say a lot of the things that were discussed, the handful of us that are former auditors in the room were kind of shaking our heads on some of it. Other pieces, they definitely hit the mark. But one of the ones that just drove me nuts was a discussion about how far behind the region was on settling some of their open enforcement actions, which I know I looked at Mike Alameda. I'm like, why are we talking about this? That's totally outside the wheelhouse or even the control of the utility. What are some of the things you've seen that are kind of head scratchers on?
Well, that's one of them, but that's been a long time, issue that all regional entities have fought at some point. I remember at the very beginning of, the audits that we were, getting ready for audits and all the self-reports and mitigation plans flying in and just being so far behind, trying to catch up that, you kind of had to, and we ended up at WEC, doing what we called a Zeramnobus, which is basically thank you for telling us your issues. Here's a $0 fine, and just to catch up. So those are challenges. But yeah, like you said, that's really outside of utilities' capabilities of influence, right? They really don't have a lot to control there, and that's a staffing issue mostly for regional entities, and it's really difficult for that to keep up. But I can see that, being a frustration point for a compliance office, right? We're trying to move forward and, you're not getting that feedback back from your regional entity, your enforcement groups or your auditors, whoever's doing it in the particular region. And that really can play havoc on any compliance program that you're trying to manage and mature. And I think that's one of the topics we wanted to talk about, Nick, was, the maturity of compliance programs. What do we have to do to help with that? And I think one of the key things that we've been discussing is, you got to measure, right? You got to have some kind of maturity model in place in order to measure your successes and establish that program. And I see a lot of maturity models around cybersecurity, right? Let's measure our cybersecurity or physical security, prowess. How well are we doing? How are we meeting, our expectations in that discipline? But I don't see much in the compliance side. Are we maturing our compliance programs? And I think that's an area where utilities really can have some influence and work towards some successes.
Yeah, I know that was definitely a challenge for me when I was at Grant, was trying to explain why I wanted to get things done a certain way. And then executives would come back and say, well, that costs a lot of money. Do we really need to do that? So, well, do you want to go into the audits and any of our engagements with WEC knowing that we're going to be fine? And they said, absolutely. I said, well, this is the path forward. And then they would ask, well, who else is doing it? Well, nobody really is. That's why there's not that consistent, easy audit situation. So.
Well, and that's a challenge out there. What model do you build your program off of? What do you like in cybersecurity? We have a number of different frameworks to buy into. We can go to the NIST CSF. You can go to ISACA type of frameworks. COSO if you want to get really into control based stuff. And there's all kinds of options out there for you. But for pure compliance, especially for NERC compliance. Let's take it down to that level. There's nothing out there that helps guide utilities towards measuring their compliance success. And that means a program success. I'm not really talking about, whether we're doing fine on SIPs, SIP 3R2. That might be part of the measurements, but really about your program. What aspects of your program are being measured for success? Are you meeting your time expectations? Are you measuring that? Are you following a structured governance model in order to assure that you have policies and procedures and processes that are being updated based on the changes of the compliance regime? The CMAP's up for a big change right now. I think it's out for vote, and that's going to have an impact to the utilities. That could be part of your measurements in order to, measure that maturity, our capability, right? It's a capability maturity model is what we're talking about specifically for compliance. I think it's really needed.
Yeah, that kind of got me thinking, and we've been talking a little bit about it, actually building something out, that framework around the compliance program maturity model. And honestly, it fits whether you're looking at NERC standards, the TSA, oil, natural gas, really any compliance. It's very similar challenges when you peel back the actual requirements to the program, as you were saying.
Yeah, I think that would be really good if we can maybe spearhead that at Archer. And I would love if any utilities listening to this, if you want to plug into a conversation with us on that. And we're looking to doing this as a kind of a white label type of solution for you. We create it and you guys can run with it, and maybe it's an industry type of thing that we can work together. We have a huge amount of experience and knowledge in this space, and I think we can come up with a pretty good framework if we all work together.
If you were to look at like 2 to 3 things that you would say were major things that would move the needle for determining the maturity of a compliance program, where would you look?
Broadly, I would look at fixing your cat or dog.
Yeah.
No, cultural things. I think improvements in your culture. And that may be hard to measure, but there's definitely some KPIs that can be found for culture improvements. I think, we talk a lot about training programs, but do we really measure, the absorption of that content? That's another area of measuring some success of your compliance. Another thing is just measuring those issues, that are near misses in your programs. And I know a lot of programs already have that in there, but are they really calculating that as a maturity measurement? Are they looking at over time, are we getting better or worse on this, and really analyzing that? So I think those are probably my top 3 at this point.
Yeah, those are all good ones. The one I always looked at, where I always started, and you could tell how an audit was going to go during the presentation when they'd show the org chart. And you'd see where compliance sat in the organization, who they reported to, who they had dotted lines to. If there were a lot of dotted lines, usually we'd layer in some questions early on to figure out if those were true or if they were filtered.
Right.
I know that was one of the challenges I ran into, is some of the people in my solid line organization didn't like what I was telling the dotted line people and wanted to be able to go in and control that message. So once that happened, that's when I knew, it's probably time to move on.
You just brought that just brought back a flood of memories of us when we used to do audits for the real audits. We would walk in, and one of the first things we used to ask was, do you want to do an internal compliance program assessment? Because that could have benefit for you in the event that you have something, a PNC or something that shows up. But I haven't seen that recently. Have you, Nick? I mean, none of the regions seem to be asking that. Maybe it's a part of the package that they get, a survey or something, but I have not heard that conversation for a long time.
I think they're looking at a lot of it earlier on in the risk assessment piece, which we did. I'm not sure how you did it when you were at WEC, but we did it. We had a risk assessment process, but it was fairly ad hoc. And there was no real clear, if this, then it's a high risk versus, if you have this, then it's a low risk. It was all judgment because there's just so many inputs into it. One of the informal things we always looked at was how engaged are they in the industry? Are they coming to, back then, the SIPUG or the CUG? Are they asking us questions between audits? Some of those things. Those were the other pieces we I would look at as well is how well do they interact with the regulators. One of the things I've seen cultures across the board, and it's not necessarily right or wrong, but it's definitely an insight into, I'd say, the micromanagement or the control is, are SMEs authorized to pick up the phone or send an email to an auditor or an enforcement person? Or do they have to run everything through compliance or legal or executives or whoever? The more filters you get, the worse it is.
It does, yeah. And I think that's a maturity level, right? Because when you first start out, you're scared, right? You're worried that somebody's going to say something wrong and the auditors are going to, ding you for that. But in reality, when there's not an audit going on, they're there to answer questions, and they'll tell you whether they can't answer it or not. So, from a maturity perspective, you want to empower your compliance analysts and people even, responsible for compliance in the field to be able to ask those questions as quickly and unfiltered as possible, because I think that's just a huge factor in, getting to the truth faster. So that's a good measurement too, I think. There's so many that can be defined, right? But I think that's the first and foremost thing that we need to do is have some a template per se of metrics that you can apply to any type of capability maturity model is, assigned to a compliance program. And I think that's something that I'm glad that the conversation's happening, and that maybe we can take the lead here, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really key. Those are some of the key indicators I always look at. Really, it's around the communication. That's ultimately the underlying thing I see on a lot of this, whether it's communication within the organization, with the regulators. And then that leads into my other big one is your staffing and your training. Do you have a revolving door somewhere in your organization? Are your SMEs steady? What kind of training do you give them, or do you just throw them to the wolves?
Right. And programs like this, if you get, really formalize this is a regular event. You're not just a one-time type of assessment. It has to be ongoing. You can't, it has very little use if it's done one time, but if it's done over time, you can show those trends, and you can also, then it gives you a tool to talk to your executives about my staffing levels, for example. Maybe you're doing a great job and everybody loves working for you, but you can't get enough staff to do what you need to do. And this could potentially indicate, the need, and provide you that ammo that you need to increase, budgeting for this compliance program.
Well, that was one of the things it was kind of a surprise to me, because I was still fairly new to the senior management director-ish level at the time. But my CFO, when I first got to Grant, when he was talking about staffing, he said, don't staff for your peaks. You know what you need. And for me, he was talking to security at the time, but it really fit compliance, because in security, we had almost doubled our security force in the summer just because we had a lot more public coming into our recreation sites. But I took that into compliance and put together a roadmap that I'm not sure if they're still using it, but it was a 3-year cycle based around the audits of when I was going to pull contractors in and how. And he looked at that and he went, you get it.
Yep.
This is the way to do it. Staff
Right.
for your steady state, use external resources for those peaks. That way you don't end up in those valleys where you've got 2 people sitting around doing nothing in a 4-person shop.
And that's a difficult thing to measure sometimes in especially in the NERC compliance with the moving targets, right? We have so many new standards, things being changed. You got to look at that too, but that could be part of, a peak versus a steady state, but there's a steady state component to change. So, you got to make sure you calculate that into your measurements. And I think that's what maturity models give you, is that framework in order to, assess this properly. And you can tell, where your goals are, and maybe gold plated isn't where you want to be, but you can see what gold plated looks like. And then you can look at what adequate looks like, and what you can look at deficient looks like. And maybe those aren't the exact criteria, but if you have that in play, and you have, a framework in which to generate these reports based on, real facts, real information, you're going to be able to manage that program so much better. And it also spotlights the weaknesses, not only in, the things that we just talked about, but it does play into the weaknesses associated with, your actual being compliant. Not the purpose of necessarily a maturity model, but that is a feeder into a maturity model is the level of compliance that you are, in the field. So, Yeah, I think this is a tool that is much needed in the industry. I suspect there's a number of utilities that do this to some extent, but there's nothing universal, and it would be really nice to have that standard based approach to that everyone can look at or at least borrow from. Not saying that we're going to have a perfect product for you because you know this, Nick. Every utility is a snowflake. That's getting overused. I got to come up with another term. There's got to be something else. Every utility is a fingerprint. I don't know.
Yeah, one of the things that I think like you really hit on it is let's define what the standard is, what gold plating is, and what's deficient. Because one of the things I routinely hear is, "Oh, we're gold plating because we had a good audit." Well, did you? How would your audit? That's one of the things that come back to compliance managers. How would your audit have gone if you weren't there, or
That's a great
your
question.
one key SME wasn't there? Said everywhere somebody has a single threaded challenge. I've yet to see a utility that didn't have some pretty strong heroics going in the compliance side and the security side, frankly. So until you can lose anybody on your team and not lose sleep over that, I don't think you're gold plating.
I don't think so either.
I think you're getting it done at best,
Yeah.
but
And you may only be getting it done for that period of time, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
there's a lot of variables associated with an audit. It could be that the auditor, that region is overwhelmed at the time, and so your audit was kind of a cursory one, and that happens. And then you wonder why, 3 years from now or 6 years from now, you get another audit, different team, different time frame, and suddenly you have a whole bunch of PNCs, and you're going, "What happened?" And that is part of your measuring. What type of audit did I get? And how ready was I for that audit, and how well did things come out, or how well would have it come out if it hadn't been in that condition? So I think that's a big play.
I would say you're not gold plating until you've gone through a mock audit with Stacy, Leonard, and Bob and got only positive observations. Then you're getting into gold plating territory.
Yeah, especially Leonard's Dark Lord of SIP.
Yep.
Yeah. These questions will kill you, and they're great questions, right? These are things that could happen to you.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably something that a lot of utilities don't realize is that there's ebb and flows in the level of scrutiny you're going to get in these audits. And right now we're kind of at a little bit on the low on some regions, but that can pop right back up to getting that those really stringent audits that end up resulting in really bad outcomes. And
all it takes is one event. I mean, you ask the entire pipeline sector about Colonial, or
Exactly.
one congressperson getting a burr and going after starting to put a bunch of congressionals out. One last thing I want to hit on, because we haven't touched on it yet, and you can't have a good conversation around maturity and compliance without tools and controls. How do you see that fitting in? I think we've all seen the shelfware.
Yeah, we see a lot of shelfware, and I think that's a big measurement of success of your compliance program. How much of the tool that you purchase to do your support in compliance has been utilized. And I know it's difficult because a lot of tools look like shiny objects, and they have all kinds of cool things they say they can do. But that doesn't come out of the box. It takes time, right? You have to have a really good plan of rollout of these tools, and I think that's a hit and miss almost all the time. Or that utilities will buy a product and underscope how much time it takes to implement, configure, and then the maintenance is almost always forgotten. So that's a measurement aspect of it. We purchased a automation tool to fit this compliance process. How well did that go? And I think that's a measurement that needs to be accounted for.
Another big piece I see get overlooked with tools is the user training and the management training. We had a great tool at Grant that was homegrown, and it worked phenomenal until the person who built it retired. We literally had to hire her daughter back through an Upworks contract to help get it figured out enough that we could keep it going. Another piece where these aren't fire and forget. Very rarely is there a tool that you can just plug in and not worry about the people that have to work on it.
Right. So you have to that's another measurement, training the operators of those tools, right? And having backup and contingency plans associated with that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I look at it is it with the tool is it giving me a consistent, sustainable, repeatable outcome? If not, then it still needs work and it's not fully implemented yet.
That could be, at a high level, it's part of the overall compliance maturity measurement, but that could be its own maturity assessment is just project based, right? That particular element. So if you're doing projects, right, and you're managing project management, which we do here at Archer, we do a lot of project management. It involves, those stop gates and measurements along the way to make sure you're hitting the success. But it always starts at the beginning where you're building those business rules and you're building a business plan adequately to associate with the, the need of the company and what it's going to take. It's really a miss if you go to your management and say, I need to buy this tool and this is how much it costs. And it is only, the 3-year cost of the product. You've missed an opportunity there and you've really done a disservice to your organization. So to me, that would be a deficiency in your maturity model of managing automation.
That's one of the things I think gets overlooked so many times. I'm sure you've seen it too, where at best you usually see is kind of what I call a 75% implementation. Got it to good enough.
Yeah.
And you leave so much on the table in that last 25%.
Well, and then the negative side of that is nobody uses it, right? Or they say they use it just to show management we're using it, but they have their back end spreadsheets that they're relying on, and that's always a challenge. Yeah.
Great conversation. There's a lot of opportunity here, and like you said, Stacy, if you're listening to this and you want to get involved with helping put together kind of probably the first comprehensive compliance maturity model, let us know. Reach out. We'd love to have that input. The biggest thing that I always learn is I don't know what I don't know. And every time I talk to somebody else, I learn something else I need to learn.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining. Have a great weekend.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
If you know of a topic or someone you think we should talk to on DirectConnect, please let us know in the comments below.